having us. I'm Ian Bigelow, and I have the joy of sort of kicking things off. So BIBFRAME implementation in Canada. So the University of Alberta Libraries is implementing BIBFRAME. This will be an ongoing iterative pursuit, but this presentation is meant to outline our experience thus far by highlighting work to date and having a focus on two key projects, namely Share VDE and LD4P, Linked Data for Production. Before diving in with BIBFRAME, I just wanted to highlight other work that's been ongoing at the University of Alberta Libraries, because this presentation is on BIBFRAME, but it's certainly not everything that we've been working on for linked data, and so I just wanted to make a note of some of that. So a few examples include the implementation of ERA, UAL's institutional repository. UAL began development of our first linked data-based IR platform through the Hydro North project back in 2014, which went up, I think, in 2015. Then Jupyter, a lightweight, rapidly developed and deployed IR application using Samvera components and PCDM began in 2017. And then ERA was built using Jupyter and launched in 2018. Another such example of some of the work that's been ongoing has been the CanLink project, which came out of the Canadian Linked Data Initiative, I'll mention in a minute. And CanLink is a linked data project for Canadian theses meant to serve as a proof of concept, as a sense, and making an emphasis on discoverability of Canadian theses and dissertations by leveraging the power of linked data to surface unexpected connections and relationships. So with the experience and expertise from our colleagues, we've been able to really help support training initiatives for BIBFRAME, as well as support the creation of tools and infrastructure for market to BIBFRAME conversion, have support for triple store setup and maintenance, for instance, and Sparkle query support, and so on. So thanks so much to everyone else. Okay. So what is BIBFRAME and what does it look like in practice? So surely many of you will have attended a presentation, webinar, or other brief overview of what BIBFRAME is. In fact, I gave a talk back in 2015 on this at Access. This is not that kind of presentation, and indeed, many such sessions have a focus that almost seems theoretical. But along with a number of other libraries, BIBFRAME is now something very real at UAL, and we hope to highlight what it's like to work with in practice. So just very briefly, this is probably BIBFRAME as you know it. 3 core levels of abstraction: work, instance, and item, additional key concepts, and a number of RDF classes and subproperties. And this is BIBFRAME today. 4 core levels of abstraction: this concept of the opus with hubs and superworks, master instance, for instance. And I'll leave this as a bit of a teaser for now. I'll loop back to that later. So BIBFRAME in Canada. Now that we've had a very brief introduction to BIBFRAME, I'd like to provide a little bit of context and sort of how we came to this path. There we go. So back in 2015, I think it's probably fair to say that Canadian initiatives for linked data were somewhat small and dispersed. And there was sort of an emphasis that a coordinated approach to linked data work that it was needed. And I think then following the Access conference in 2015, again, Access is way of haunting you. There was a day-long meeting with invited experts and I think the Carl V research libraries to try to sort of map out a plan for how to put together such an initiative. And from that sprung the Canadian Linked Data Initiative, which roughly from 2015 to 2017, through noted working groups and with the help of a summit in October 2016, I think really helped forge these noted strategic intentions. This group has now ceased, but I think sort of the work on testing tools and sort of building skills across institutions in Canada and bringing other institutions on board as well really helped forward things. Through CFLA, there's been a lot of work to sort of pick up on cataloging standards. Of course, the work of the Canadian Committee on Cataloging and the Canadian Committee on Metadata Exchange has been ongoing for some time, but they've really had, I think it's fair to say, fairly limited analysis of BIBFRAME. For this reason, the Canadian BIBFRAME Readiness Task Force was struck roughly maybe a little less than a year ago with a mandate to outline the impact of migrating from ARC to BIBFRAME in libraries in Canada, to assess the understanding and readiness for BIBFRAME transitioning in libraries in Canada, and to make recommendations on how Canadian libraries can be supported through this transition. So there will be documentation coming out on this in the next little while in both English and French. UAL has also been very active with the wider international community on BIBFRAME, increasing and building relationships and collaborations, going back to 2015 and earlier, I guess. One very good example of this is work with the Program for Cooperative Cataloging. UAL is a PCC member. We've been heavily involved in this work on committees. The standards used for bibliographic description for our ILS, as well as sort of across our consortium, across NEOS, utilize PCC standards. And this little excerpt from their strategic directions document for 2018 to 2021 really emphasizes sort of a bit of a shift that we've had in the past number of years. The move beyond knowledge and skills related to linked data and at a theoretical level and into implementation. Also, over the past few years, there's been a lot of work really bringing BIBFRAME beyond just as a project for the Library of Congress, really moving on to an international scale. So this diagram serves to highlight how connected the work of many of these groups has been. There's been a lot of project overlap. This Venn diagram really isn't perfect, I apologize, but to try to capture that. And with work from one project really informing another. So UAL's a member of LD4P, PCC, Share VDE, but we've also been collaborating with the Library of Congress and with the wider international BIBFRAME community. Speaking of an international BIBFRAME community, there's been something of a, over the past few years, maybe something of a coming together of those working on BIBFRAME implementation, forming a bit of a informal international community. Of course, there's those institutions that have already been noted, PCC, Share VDE. We'll hear more about Share VDE and LD4P in a minute. But then incorporating initiatives more internationally with a bit more of a European focus there. 3 years ago, there was a meeting in Frankfurt where a number of different European institutions pulled together. A year later in Fiesole, then there was a more international group that pulled together sort of a number of different institutions working on implementation. And that was followed up just this current September with a group in Stockholm that really, I think, really brought together what represents sort of an international group working on these things. So one key theme that sort of has come up over the past few years was a need to transition to an implementation mindset and really prepare for a significant change. As the quotation here from Sally McCallum from the Library of Congress notes, we really are going through a fairly significant change for cataloging and metadata, and then for libraries as a whole. So at UAL, along with work on other teams within our institution, but also then looking at BIBFRAME, we reached a point where further engagement required the support of multiple units, institutional backing, and so forth. This kind of brings us in sync to ALA Annual in 2018, where the Library of Congress confirmed that BIBFRAME would be their replacement for MARC. Now, noted I have a background in classics, but the mind is a funny thing. When I first heard this from colleagues, the first concept that came to mind was the die is cast. We really do rely on shared cataloging practices in libraries. So the more institutions doing this work, the easier it will be to forge ahead. And I guess the converse of that is that the more pressure there will be to forge ahead. So work along with activity in Canada and the wider international community brought us to a point for a need of reflection, think about strategic priorities and so forth. And based on experiences on project work across cataloging and metadata strategies, CanLink, Jupyter, Share VDE, plans for LD4P, a group is pulled together from multiple units to map out a vision document for moving forward with linked data at UAL. That was later further reinforced by the UAL strategic directions for 2019 to 2020, to work collaboratively with national and international partners to provide leadership and advance the transition towards open linked data for libraries. Now, this work is not without its challenges, and involves a certain amount of change management. So this strategic direction has been critical. But at this point, I'll pass things over to Abigail for further detail. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to change our direction a little bit so we can focus specifically on what UAL has done to build capacity for a move from MARC to BIBFRAME. So our cataloging and metadata strategies unit has certainly undergone a large shift over the past 3.5 years in our move from work in BIBFRAME, which is more so kind of research and analysis focused, to one where we're focusing on incremental implementation. So this shift is best embodied by overviewing the gradual changes that our unit and subsequently other units at the libraries have undergone to support this implementation. So I do want to highlight that BIBFRAME readiness hasn't happened for us overnight. Instead, it's been a journey that's involved rethinking our roles, updating our mindsets and our infrastructure, and championing the value of change both within our unit and in the library as a whole. So I'm going to highlight these changes by reviewing a few key categories, such as our unit-wide updates to staff roles and expectations, enabling staff to meet those expectations through training, our work aligning and establishing linked data as a strategic priority, and finally, by integrating ourselves in the national and international linked data community, which has helped us to build new skills, share our experience, and contribute to the future of resource description. So, since Ian's already reviewed some of our work on strategic priority setting and gaining institutional support, I'm not going to cover that again. However, I do want to highlight that this step has been critical for us to build buy-in, both within and outside of our own unit. It's been really important for staff to see the value and direct application of their work to the goals of the library, especially when this work may be perceived as outside the scope of staff's existing knowledge, expertise, and in particular, their technical comfort level. So to support our staff through this transition, our unit has undergone a few staffing updates, and the biggest of this was a full unit review that happened in 2017, which resulted in updates to job expectations and job fact sheets. So these updates focused on bringing in language that enables staff to actually spend time pursuing training in linked data and the associated infrastructure, as well as to spend focused time on how they can transition their current workflows in cataloging from MARC to BIBFRAME. So two key staffing updates we've also undergone is, one, we've hired a 1-year linked data library resident, which has been brought on this last year to help us out with all of the various projects that we're on. So this is really great for us to have specific support in this area, but also a great opportunity for someone just out of their education to dive into this kind of work. In addition, as part of our LD4P grant funding, we did get funding to hire an additional monograph specialist who is kind of offsetting the work of our permanent staff members on that team to allow them to have more focused time to spend on work on BIBFRAME in the LD4P project work context, and I'll talk more about that in a second. So obviously training initiatives have also been key to empowering our staff members to dive into BIBFRAME project work. So training began, as it probably has in other institutions, with Library of Congress webinars as well as ELEX webinars on the LD4P projects and their outcomes. However, we've also since invested in unit-wide certification in the Library JUICE XML and RDF-based systems course, and this has allowed staff to build a foundation in linked data structure and the underlying technologies that allow us to work with and query BIBFRAME data. So to support learning, we also frequently come together as a unit in what we call linked data lab time sessions, where we work collaboratively through ideas or concepts or questions that have come up through the course of the certificate work we are doing or the projects that we're now working on. Finally, as part of our involvement with the LD4P project, we've had formal training opportunities offered by the Library of Congress specific to that project, and the PCC is also putting out formalized training that we'll be going through soon as well. So building capacity for our work in linked data has also required gaining the infrastructural support to enable us to work with large BIBFRAME data sets. So while we are involved in these two large-scale projects, Share VDE and LD4P, which themselves are focusing on this kind of community-wide infrastructure, what this has meant locally for us is that we've been working with our colleagues in information technology services to set up and test a local production triple store, also to figure out how the workflows for sending and receiving our mark data back in BIBFRAME from the Share VDE project will work, and investigating how we might use our BIBFRAME data enriched with URIs to perform authority control in our local CERC ILS. So building expertise has also required enabling staff to actually put their training into practice, which we know is key for building any kind of skill. And so we've done this through engaging staff in BIBFRAME experimentation and analysis. So initially, this started off with a smaller group of librarians and one support staff, where we looked at various MARC to BIBFRAME conversions and kind of analyzed their outcomes and how they were successful or not successful. One of these included our very own Danush Davuti's MARC to BIBFRAME converter, and you'll hear more about that from him tomorrow. But now that we're involved in both the Share VDE project and the LD4P project, we've been able to open up involvement across our unit for this experimentation analysis work for more staff, which has been great. So speaking of project work, engagement with the larger BIBFRAME community has also been really key to building capacity to take our work from more experimentation to implementation focused. Ian's already kind of mentioned some of the community initiatives that we're involved in, so those committees and working groups and projects. But we've also presented at conferences, attended relevant conferences, and these are all great opportunities for us to learn and as well as to share. So that kind of covers what we've been doing thus far, and a big piece of our involvement now is really these two large-scale BIBFRAME projects that we're on. So I'm going to start by covering the LD4P project, and then I'm going to pass it over to Michele, who's going to talk more about Share VDE. And I will caveat this by saying that these two projects, while they are separate, are also interconnected in some ways. So I will be mentioning Share VDE, but you'll get more context on that later from Michele. So many of you might be familiar with the Linked Data for Production family of projects. LD4P has been a multi-year Andrew Mellon grant-funded project to pilot moving linked data for libraries into production. The initial project phase ran from 2016 to 2018 and focused on developing standards, guidelines, and infrastructure to communally produce linked open data for library resources. This project also really focused on extending the BIBFRAME ontology to look at specialized domains and formats, which we know is very important in the work that we do. And so after 2018, the newest LD4P phase was announced with a call for a larger cohort. And at this time, UAL sees this opportunity to kind of expand our involvement in the BIBFRAME implementation world. So this latest phase of LD4P is a wider community-driven initiative with 24 member institutions. The project has 7 broad goals that expand on the work of the first grant. And this focuses on participatory, community-based development of a cloud BIBFRAME cataloging editor, as well as a Blacklight-based discovery layer enhanced to enable linked data discovery techniques. So another part of this grant is really the policy and workflow development happening among cohort libraries, where we're working to ensure that library metadata, both MARC and BIBFRAME, continues to meet PCC standards in this new environment, that it's effectively enhanced with identifiers, as well as better integrated with core external linked data sources such as Wikidata. So just to kind of give you a context of the size and scale of this project, here is a photo from the cohort meeting held last December in DC. So take all of these people and multiply them by a huge team of people supporting them, and that's kind of where we're at in this project. Now to complicate things slightly, I just want to kind of outline Share VDE's current role in the LD4P project. So As I've mentioned, LD4P is focused on creating the systems and tools required to create BIBFRAME descriptions natively. So in this context, what Share VDE is contributing is the MARC to BIBFRAME conversions, reconciliation, and enrichment of each cohort institution's catalog records. So their entire MARC catalog converted to BIBFRAME. These large BIBFRAME datasets then provide each institution with a BIBFRAME base upon which they can build and connect to using these native BIBFRAME descriptions that they're creating through the LD4P project work. So in our accepted proposal for our contributions and what we want to actually accomplish as part of this LD4P grant, we have 4 broad goals for that. The first is the enhancement of conversion, reconciliation, and enrichment processes for MARC to BIBFRAME. So this is something we've been working on since the start of our involvement in this kind of BIBFRAME community. It's something we're going to continue to do. We're also looking at explorations into new forms of authority control based on URIs, so investigating both how URIs can be used in MARC data as well as in BIBFRAME data to perform authority control. The largest part, though, of this grant for us is the conversion of our monograph team's kind of daily operations. So we're looking at converting their work to a BIBFRAME context in 3 different ways. So the first is through original cataloging. So they're going to be creating native BIBFRAME descriptions for resources in an original cataloging context. And then we're also looking at developing and supporting BIBFRAME copy cataloging workflows, because we know that we're not all doing original cataloging all the time. And then another big piece of what our team does is the bulk loading of large electronic record sets. So that's something we're really interested in investigating, how that is going to work in a BIBFRAME and a linked data context. So finally, we are also looking at supporting the creation of a wider BIBFRAME community. So for us, as I think we've proved, external community building is important. However, as a member of an 18 library consortium with a shared ILS, ensuring that our NEOS consortium partners are up to date on the work we're doing and the main concepts of BIBFRAME and where we're moving to is another really important area of focus for us. So this work is kind of always iterative and ongoing and something that's in the back of our minds that we need to ensure that we're doing. So moving from our goals to the actual deliverables and results of the grant work so far, I'm going to highlight some of the key infrastructure that's being developed by the LD4P developer team to help us accomplish these goals. As I've mentioned, the core of the LD4P Phase 2 project is the creation and use of a linked data editor for native BIBFRAME descriptions. This editor has been created and aptly named Sinopia, so you can see that on the screen up here. And the term Sinopia aptly refers to the preliminary drawing for a fresco or mural, named for the reddish-brown pigment traditionally used to draw or transfer it. So when you think about what LD4P Sinopia is, it's really this kind of preliminary step, a sketch of what's possible on the way to a full-fledged linked data production environment. So what Sinopia is going to enable us to do and enable the other cohort members to do is have this linked data environment where we can do cataloging without having to set up and maintain our own individual tools, which would be out of the scale of what any really individual library could do. It's also allowing us to learn and create best practices related to linked data creation for library resources. It is also going to allow us to explore that idea of cooperative cataloging, so linking to shared descriptions and identifiers, as well as continue to contribute feedback and our expertise to the iterative development of this kind of editor. So I am going to note that the Sinopia editor is based off of the Library of Congress's BIBFRAME editor and is intended to be an open tool once development is complete. This means that Sinopia will soon be available to the wider library community for testing, application, or even adaptation. Training has currently been made available through the Library of Congress and is open on the web. However, the creation of a detailed Sinopia training plan is also underway by the PCC, which will be available to the cohort soon, as well as then to the wider library community later. So while our goals for our involvement and outcomes in this project are ambitious, I outlined those 4 before, like any new kind of infrastructure or tool development, there have been a few snags along the way for this project. As of April 2019, the Sinopia minimum viable product was meant to be available for cohort members to begin original cataloging in BIBFRAME. However, due to some delays and bugs, the MVP wasn't released until just mid-August. Another key piece of this MVP was the profile editor, which is used to create profiles that act as the basis for resource description in the editor. So basically, profiles are a tool used to put constraints on the BibFrame data that a cataloger is going to enter about a particular type of resource. And this has also been the site of many technical issues. And without usable profiles, there's no cataloging. And much like, so what the PCC has currently for CONSER and BibCo standard records for monographs and serials, this is what UAL has been trying to accomplish to be able to start cataloging. We've been trying to create a standard profile for monographs cataloging. And so I can say now that we have successfully done this. In the past few weeks, the bugs have been worked out. So resource description is going to start very soon in kind of that original cataloging context. So I'm just going to give you a brief little tour of what Sinopia looks like. So this is the profile editor. So this is where someone can go in and create the outline for what description should look like for a particular resource. And then we have the linked data editor, which is what the cataloger would see when they go in to create a description for a particular resource. They have the different areas that they can fill out and should expect to see for a different resource type. This one is for monographs. So while Sinopia and the LD4P project focus on original linked data creation, the role of lookups, controlled vocabularies, and external authority integration in this project are also key to its success. The Sinopia Authority Lookup Service utilizes LD4L's Questioning Authority Service, which is a core component of the Samvera development community. Like Sinopia, the Questioning Authorities tool, which we refer to as QA, has the ability to be extended beyond the current context in the LD4P project because it is open. So this component, this authority lookup service, is really important because decisions around integration of lookups, which authorities we pull from, which real-world object vocabularies we use, and other controlled linked data vocabularies is important to prioritize for what resource description is going to look like going forward, and ensuring that we have interoperability between the data that different libraries are creating. As a Canadian library, we also note the lack of availability for Canadian name and subject authorities in RDF, so this is something that we are also thinking about and what the implications for that will be in the future of cataloging for Canadian libraries. So here's just an example of what one of the lookups looks like in the editor. So here we have an example of a lookup to the Share VDE data for the opus level of a particular resource. So finally, I'm going to close by just highlighting that while we have this very defined project plan for what we're doing in the grant cycle, one of the benefits of being part of this project is the ability to sit on various affinity and working groups where we can share and build our expertise in ways that align specifically with what our particular roles are at the university. So while I am not part of the monographs team or part of that kind of conversion of their workflows, I have been able to sit on the serials affinity group where we're working on creating a serials profile that will work for the CONSER members as well as the rest of the serial community for BibFrame cataloging into the future. So our colleagues sit on many of these working groups, and it's really been a great opportunity for us to engage kind of beyond the very specific things we want to accomplish in our grant and build that community and share expertise. So that's it for the LD4 project, and I'm going to pass it over to Michele, who's going to talk to you a bit more about Share VDE.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Abigail. And I'm very grateful to the organizers of this conference for the opportunity to give an overview of the Share virtual discovery environment. Share VDE is a library-driven initiative to establish an effective working environment for the use of linked data by libraries within a global context. Library data are enriched with additional information and relationships, and bibliographic and authority data are reconciled and converted into linked data. A virtual discovery platform with a structure of the BIBFRAME data model is created to simplify the way in which that data is consumed. The network of resources created is a basis for the Share VDE Sapientia cluster knowledge base, the common authoritative source of clusters accessible in RDF, open to the entire Share VDE community and beyond, as this is a core component of the entire initiative. We, as Casalini Libri, started to be seriously engaged in BIBFRAME in 2015, when the Library of Congress told us that the day would come when we would be asked to supply the data in BIBFRAME, together or instead of MARC. We therefore strengthened our research and development activities in this field, and with the encouragement also of Stanford, initiated this project that is now in its third phase. Who is responsible for it? First of all, the joint effort of the Share VDE Advisory Council and the working groups is a leading part of the entire group. Casalini Libri, as you probably know, is provider of bibliographic and authority data as member of the program of cooperative cataloging. At CULT is a provider of ILS, discovery tools, and semantic web solutions for the cultural heritage sectors, and at CULT is our long-standing technological partner who also worked on the European-funded project Aliada. Share VDE is strongly influenced by the vision of the Linked Data Initiative, as was already mentioned earlier, and has the input and active participation from an international group of research libraries. The Share VDE Advisory Council role is to provide insight and analysis of the MARC to BIBFRAME transformation, to make recommendations for improvements based on member library data analysis and project documentation. The Advisory Council also provides overall guidance to the activities of the Share VDE initiative. There are 4 subcommittees focusing on specific areas: Work Identification Working Group, Authority Identifier Management Service Working Group, the Cluster Knowledge Base Editor Working Group, and the User Experience User Interface Working Group. The first one, the Work Identification Working Group, reviews the Share VDE work clustering processes and submits feedback on potential improvements or optimizations. Reviews the use of primary source identifiers in the Share VDE dataset and provides feedback as appropriate, and engages with the PCC to identify and/or develop best practices for use of these identifiers in BIBFRAME and MARC data. The Authority Identifier Management Services Working Group defines guidelines and best practices for authority identifier management in the linked data environment, defines scope and data flow for creation and implementation of service based on preliminary documentation, and proposes additional use cases identified as essential for effective knowledge-based management. As mentioned earlier, the Cluster Knowledge Base is a core component of the entire initiative. The Cluster Knowledge Base Editor Working Group has a task to define the use cases and to guide its developments. An essential part of the MARC to RDF conversion process is the maintenance of metadata that have been produced and registered on the Cluster Knowledge Base. The group analyzes how libraries interact with the Cluster Knowledge Base and their use of the editor for modifying, deleting, merging, and separating clusters. The same approach will be applied on the data originally created in BIBFRAME. And the User Experience User Interface Working Group analyzed the search path for the workflows of both patrons and librarians. The goal is to harness the potential of linked data to offer an easy and intuitive user experience, delivering even more wide-ranging and detailed search results based on an adaptation of the BIBFRAME data model. The Share VDE family of initiatives based on the linked data comprises Share VDE, Share Art, prompted by the Art History Libraries of the Max Planck Institute and others, and Share Music, a pilot in the music domain. The different characteristics of each field are a useful asset that can be used to the advantage not only of the Share VDE family as a whole, but for other single disciplines. In addition, specific production environments can be foreseen, for example, for consortia or single libraries. A consortia example is in southern Italy, a group of 8 universities, some of them using local ILS based on Unimark, other on Mark 21. They are in production with a separate so-called tenant of Share VDE. And a single library example is University of Pennsylvania that will have a specific skin with specific extensions. In both cases, a number of API in both directions from and to the ILS or, for example, the interlibrary loan systems are foreseen. Here you have, you can see the geographical distribution of the participating libraries. All LD4P members and cohort institutions participate in Share VDE plus New York University and the National Library of Norway. And further announcements are foreseen soon. And this slide shows us how linked data can become an instrument to change how institutions engage with each other, enabling an even more web-based entity identification and discoverability, building also new bridges among the LAM, Library, Archive, Museum domains. From the top down on the slide, you can see the skins that differ among the Share family components, the data sets, bibliographic holding data with external sources, etc., that contribute to the cluster knowledge base, the so-called tenants that allow to organize data in different data pools when appropriate for the group. Share VDE is always independent from the local operational systems, also because during the conversations at the libraries, we see that the change of the ILS is often not the priority. Priority is to show to library administration, in most cases, that linked data brings advantages, not only to cataloging and metadata activities, but also to the services that the institutions deliver to scholars, researchers, and students. Some of the external sources can be found here from on the slides, and goes, of course, from OCLC identifiers to ID.log.gov, VIAF, the GND of the Deutsche Nationalbibliothek, BNF, and Wikidata, and so on. A brief Share VDE deliverable overview. Deliverable 1 is the catalog of each library converted into BIBFRAME 2 model. Entities are reconciled in the dataset and linked to Share VDE project URIs of the following of deliverable. Deliverable 2 is a cluster knowledge base in RDF format, available at different levels for all institutions as it includes data from all the participants. The cluster knowledge base is, of course, open to everyone, also to the non-members. Otherwise, it could not become an authoritative source. Deliverable 3 is a dataset converted in BIBFRAME with external URIs included. This dataset includes a certain number of relationships already present in the cluster knowledge base and works autonomously. And deliverable 4 is the MARC version of deliverable 3, that means it includes the URIs. Deliverable 5 is the Share VDE bibliographical dataset made available on the Triple Store. And deliverable 6 is the online platform. This is the current interface that you can find at www.share.org. share-vde.org that proposes the person work layer and the instance or publication layer and the item layer. And this will be the new user interface where entities have been renamed in a way that can be clearer to end users and represented with different icons depicting person, original work, publications, and others. For example, also subjects will be addressed. Here we have a preliminary sketch of the cluster knowledge base editor that has the aim to enable a new form of cooperation for creating, modifying, invalidating, merging, splitting clusters. The URI registry will be a fundamental component of this scenario. Of course, in parallel, an essential role is that of the automatic update procedures. Here we can see an overview of the interaction among the involved parties and components. From the top of the slide, you can find this already mentioned cohort and full members of Share VDE. And you can find who contributes to the various data sets. Sapienza is a cluster knowledge base, and to the bibliographical data set that are both on the triple store. The master instance is a logical level that will be introduced in the coming months in order to serve better union catalog needs without losing the possibility to retrieve the distinct descriptions of each institution that rely on specific local rules, sometimes habits or guidelines. So what comes next to come to an end of this part of the presentation? We are working on API layers for ILS, external applications, and other linked data systems. Authority management and services extensions will be developed. Reporting tools to serve library needs. Internationalization of the Share VDE environment in the relationship of new projects. Strategies to make the Share VDE environment a trusted source of identifiers and to facilitate interaction with international initiatives as Wikidata, WIAF, ISNI. And application for further Wikidata entity properties. Share VDE has already a property for authors. And let me conclude that the initiative is absolutely not a product, but is a community-driven initiative. And from this point of view, I mean, it's the community that will shape also the future of Share VDE. I turn it now again to Ian.
Thank you. So for UAL, Share VDE is a project in itself, but as noted, also a key component of our work with LD4P. And it's really been an incredibly valuable way to work with the international community to further develop BIBFRAME. But perhaps more importantly, to do so by working with our own data, because our own data is getting converted, we get it back. So ways to test the data, to refine it and so forth, ways to test discovery, ways to test infrastructure. These are really valuable things to try to move ahead. And I know that Michele showed sort of the map of institutions, but I thought it's worth highlighting here sort of the benefits of collaborative effort and the breadth of work with Share VDE. UAL has been active in the development of the project since early 2017 through participation in steering meetings, use case design, analysis of conversion processes, now work with the Share VDE Advisory Council and different working groups. So being really active in that development along with the rest of the community is really quite helpful. Which really allows for the refinement of the BIBFRAME data, the BIBFRAME model, but also as our data. So this is the current Share VDE model outline, which kind of highlights some of the changes from BIBFRAME as you know it. But this is also how our data is now currently represented in BIBFRAME. And it's worth emphasizing again, I know Michele noted it, but we get the BIBFRAME data back. We see it in the portal, but we also get it back so we can use it how we want it. The same as with our mark that comes back enriched with URIs, and we'll be getting ongoing updates for both of those. So whether we use them in the online portal or we use them in our own systems, we can make use of it as we will. So it's a way to really get our hands dirty, make things better at the same time, which is really quite nice. So the development shown here with the different opus type of works, the hubs and the superworks, adding the extra sort of layer of abstraction to the BIBFRAME model, really is a good example of said development. And I don't know, I'm extremely excited. Abigail showed very briefly the example of the lookups with this data in it. So this isn't just an abstract data model, right, or an abstraction in terms of some new idea. We've actually got the data. We can look it up and add it to our own, right? It's there in Sapientia knowledge base, and we can look it up, query it, use it. So I mean, this diagram does further highlight updates to BIBFRAME as a result of the work of Share VDE. But also then, I guess without diving into this in too much more detail, points to the value of engaging with the wider community and having a voice in the development of metadata standards that we'll have to work with over the coming years. And so to bring things together, we have this data flow map, kindly provided by Philip Schroer from LD4P, showing the interaction between LD4P and Share VDE. And we really start to see something very real coming together, which is pretty exciting, something that can enable transitioning of workflows. I know there's still a number of things missing, but things to become rather exciting. So next steps at UAL, infrastructure in general. We need to connect some of these things to day-to-day work. Refining an operational BIBFRAME editor. Of course, we have Sinopia, but we need to continue making it better. Continue working on mark to BIBFRAME conversion processes. Continue testing discovery through Share VDE and the LD4P project. But then, work has to continue on a day-to-day basis. And we're part of a consortium, so we need to think about other things as well. So life needs to continue. So in terms of BIBFRAME implementation, there's a few, I guess it's fair to say, pain points. We need BIBFRAME to mark converter, because we'll be in a hybrid environment for some time. We need to support our ILS, for instance, for reserves and all kinds of fun functions. We need to work on batch processing, testing workflows with vendors, having a production environment that works with key tools such as ILL and CIRC and all that. Continue work on entity and identifier support and maintenance. And so far, the focus, at least for the LD4P, our part of the LD4P project is focused on our monographs team. So we will need to then bridge from that into looking at other formats, serials, for instance. Though that's where learning from other institutions, so as they do their work, is really valuable too. Thinking about the serials affinity group. But we need to remember that this is part of incremental change. No one institution can do everything, and we can't do everything at once, one step at a time. And sometimes infrastructure change can seem messy, but it's all part of the process. Those at UAL may well recognize this image. It's not necessarily a bad thing. So a few lessons learned and key takeaways. One is that institutional strategic support is key in order to build technical support, staff buy-in, and so forth. Learning also happens through training, but also on the ground. No one is an expert in everything. We also need to acknowledge that during transition, there won't be perfection. Progress isn't synonymous with perfection. This is a really important one. Not all the bugs are worked out of Sinopia. A lot of them, but not all of them. Things that won't be perfect for some time. And I think many of us are used to at least striving for perfection, so this creates discomfort. So we need to get a little bit used to that. Implementation through iteration as above, and then experimentation versus implementation, sort of as a general theme. There's much to be defined, refined, and developed here, but at least now we have tools to move progressively into production. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, Abigail, and Michele. I want to open the floor for questions. Either microphone. While we're waiting, I have a question. On the human side of things, really, I mean, you mentioned the support and the resources available to staff in this transition, but I'm sure some of these staff have been dealing with these tools and these workflows for decades. What's the reception been like?
Sorry, to be fair, it's been mixed. As I said, there's been a lot of excitement, which is nice. I think in many ways, when you see something that is workable, people really want to get their hands in. And so having something to work with, whether it be the data or an editor or a discovery tool that you can actually poke around at, even if there are bugs, can often be really exciting. But the opposite side of that, as I mentioned, is some of the discomfort, which I think comes with any kind of change management in many ways. But yeah, it's be an ongoing process.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hello, I don't know how hot this mic is. There we go, down to my size. Hi, I'm Robin Demel, and I am a cataloging librarian at McGill. And thank you to the three of you for your presentation today. It's been great to hear what you've been up to. I know from perspective of another Canadian institution, we are definitely watching you very closely. And kind of a bit of a comment, I just wanted to say how great it is to see that you guys have that support. And also great that you're about to get into experimentation with the actual editor. So yes, yeah, thank you.
And it will be available for you too to try out soon, so
Excellent.
do that too.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Go.
Sorry, I was going to say LD4 hasn't made a point of highlighting it because there's been a number of the development has taken longer than they had hoped. But I mean, really, Sinopi is available now for anyone to. You can request a login.
Yep.
Copy one of the resource templates, use it yourself. Clone it, adapt it for your own usage. But just within the past month, it's really since Friday in many ways, it's come to a point where I think like catalogers can really pick it up and use it without pulling their hair out too much. So that's pretty exciting.
That's awesome. Good luck.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.